This is going to be the start to episode 31 of An Untold Narrative. In the room, we have Nigel Langley. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
So he is, I don't want to use footwear extraordinaire already, but he's definitely made a name for himself in his youthful career of footwear design and really being super passionate about it and driving the conversation around being a creative in the industry specifically. So thanks for joining us, Nigel. Where are you and how are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm in Jersey right now. I'm doing all right. I'm like halfway through thesis right now, so tied with that. Like, just trying to finish up school and work and all that. So it's a lot, but I'm in.
So we'll get into your kind of current education state, and I appreciate you taking the time, especially during thesis, because it definitely takes up a lot of time and
It definitely does.
and it sucks. So, but you mentioned you're in New Jersey. Are you born and raised in Jersey, or where
Yeah.
are you from? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, born and raised here. Let's see, the only time I've like really lived outside of New Jersey for school, I moved to New York. But other than that, born and raised here, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
How so talk about your come up and were you always creative, were you always drawing, like how did you get a sense of you wanted to become a designer in general?
I think I've always been sort of creatively inclined. When I was on my father's side of the family, there's a couple creative professionals in there. My father was a freelance illustrator for a while. I have a aunt who was a commercial artist like years ago. She's retired now, but yeah, I think I was always like generally exposed to art and design growing up. So I think I found myself sort of gravitating to it. And it's something that I've always done as long as I could remember. I've been drawing, illustrating, or just it's always been, I guess, it was a hobby initially, and then as a hobby that I found a way to monetize, with varying success. But it became something more than just a hobby for me. So I've always been into drawing, and then someday, and I knew I wanted to be a designer for a long time. I think I made the decision that I wanted to be a product designer of some sort. I might have been around like 13 when I made that. Like when
Man, that's
I really
early.
came to that. Yeah, I remember initially I wanted to be a car designer, and I think that's a common thing with footwear guys. Like everybody either has been, wanted to be, or some people balance both. But yeah, initially wanted to be a car designer, and then I had this sort of also at a really young age. I had this sort of epiphany about access and things like that. Like if I work at a car company, especially a car company doing really cool cars, my salary might not agree with what I want to make, or with the things that I design. So it's like, and also the people, also other people that may be a fan of my work have no way of accessing it because cars are not cheap.
So I'm gonna just pick at that comment real specifically. You're talking about the value of a vehicle is like arguably one of the larger purchases somebody's ever going to make in their life outside of maybe a home. And
Right.
you creating for something like that is you're going to get paid, let's just call it 60 grand a year to do something that's worth 60 grand just as
Right.
one versus
Right.
not the 100,000 they're going to produce or whatever it is.
Right. So it's like that was one thing for me where I'm like, I'm gonna design this thing that like I still love cars, and it's like I love the car design process and all that. But it'd be like I'd be designing this thing that nobody gets to interact with, or it's like my friends and family cannot afford to just buy every car design, and also the length of time between ideation and production on a car is insane. So it's like
Like
that could
5 or
be
6 years, right?
right. It's like on average like 6 years. On the long end can be up to 10 years. So it's like I'm not. Yeah. So I didn't want to create something like that. And it's just like designing things that nobody can really interact with. That's not something that I was overly interested in. But also at the same time, growing up in Jersey, I'm exposed to sneaker culture, and it's always been a thing here. It's like we have and a lot of people think it's the same as New York sneaker culture, but some things, do overlap, but there's certain unique things that happen here, and that's something I've always grown up in. So it just became a thing of applying what I understood and knew about car design to footwear, and just really sharpening, well, exploring and sharpening at the same time, to the point where, you know, I was good enough that I felt comfortable sharing it. So finally started like, you know, gave myself an outlet on social media. It got noticed by, you know, a couple people in the industry, and then eventually that led to like, you know, my first professional working design opportunity.
So, but
I was,
before we
yeah, I
before we
was
go, before we go into that, do you
for sure.
remember the first time you could translate the passion of car design to like, I'm going to become a footwear designer? Like, do you remember that moment in time, or like, how did you first discover footwear design as a thing? Because that's a topic of conversation we have with a lot of people, of whether that's a magazine or they remember Nike
Right.
Talks, or they remember, like, what was your first discovery of that?
Um, let's see. I'm trying to think about that. My first discovery. I'm not sure. I remember like I just started sketching shoes one day because, you know, I felt like someone has to have that job. You know, like I'm like that because if there's car designers, there obviously are sneaker designers. They look like
Sure.
something, right? So that was just something that just dawned on me. And then like as I started, you know, drawing these shoes or referencing these shoes that I had done, or referencing these shoes like, you know, I admire. Um, I started to look into it, like, you know, who actually does these things and stuff like that. But basically, like, I was just taking like things that inspired me at the time. So this has to be a 14-year-old-ish version of myself. Like, you know, drawing shoes, the proportions were like trash. Um, you know, like some of these were like these really strange mashups of like what was like contemporary at the time. So I was what, 13 or 14. So the year had to be 2012 or 13. So just think about what was hot then. So, you know, you have it's like the Red October era. We're fresh off of Galaxy phones and all of that. So things like that are making it into my early sketches and stuff like that. And it wasn't so much about like, you know, design theory and things like that. It was just really like, oh, that looks cool.
It was about
Or, you know,
creating the lines and making
right.
something that looks cool.
It was like, you know, really 2013 cool though. Like I'm so happy that those shoes don't exist in real life. Um, but it was something I was making. Like, so those were like, you know, my earliest explorations of footwear. And then it became this thing of this. I found this series that Nick DiPaolo was doing, and it was inside the designer studio. I think that's what it was. He was doing it when he was still a Soul Collector.
Okay.
So he had a couple of interviews with different designers, and they would talk through the process. You know what inspires them, and you know, just basically having these like, you know, full multifaceted like, you know, deep dives into designers, and that's not something you normally see. Normally, like when there's a hype shoe being released, all the hype is somehow around everybody except for the person who made the shoe look the way it looks. So I'm like, okay, that's fine, because it's like I get it. Like, and plenty of designers, you know, would want to stay out of the way. It's just like regular people aren't interested in all that. Like, please, like Kanye be the focus of Yeezy instead of Nicki Minaj. So so watching like Nick DiPaolo's like, you know, series and interviews and like gaining these insights from these designers. Luckily enough, like, you know, I got a chance to work with a few of them. I think like Peter Fogg's was really interesting, and that was one that that really stood out to me because, like, you know, I grew up in New Jersey, so ACG has always been sort of integral to like the New Jersey uniform, especially where I'm from, so Essex County. So that was something that stood out to me, and just taking like, you know, the way that they looked at design, taking that and figuring out what it was for me, and I still am figuring out what it is for me.
Sure.
But after I started applying some of that and just like bringing that into my work, I felt like it definitely went a bit uphill. So
So talk
it was
about
yeah.
that transition moment, right? You're starting to build up your sketches. You're starting to understand, like, you know, how you can access this sense of creativity around footwear, and you start sharing it online, right? Like that's totally how I discovered your work, and I think that's how you got discovered in general, right? Is through
Mhm.
social media. Talk about like that transition, right? Like, were you just like, fuck it, I'm gonna put out this work, and you know, if people like it, they like it, or was your intent to be just like, I'm gonna share this with everybody, and like, I hope
I,
to get a job through it?
partially that. It's like one end, it's like, you know, I have my heart set on like, you know, doing design professionally. Like that's what I wanted to do. I had like already started looking at design schools and stuff like that, even though it was like a few years out for me. Um, yeah, so and I just wanted some of these things to, you know, have a home that's not inside of my sketchbook. And it's like, you know, I'd like for other people to see this, and it's like, you know, feedback, constructive crit, and it's just like I need people to see these things because I don't go to an art school. Like, I know they have like, fine arts high schools and stuff like that. It's not where I went. I went to Bloomfield High. It's like regular high school, underfunded arts program, like, the American special.
Yeah,
So yeah,
literally the American specialty right there.
exactly. We have 4 gyms at that high school and like barely had lights in the art department. So
Jesus.
right. So it was just basically that. So it's like I don't necessarily have this huge group of creatives in like, my immediate community. So it's like I need to share these things, get them out there in the world so people can like, see them, and also like, so that I can grow from what I'm hearing and all of that. So that's sort of what pushed me to put everything out there, or most things out there, and just gaining feedback from there. And then on top of that, networking. So
Yeah.
finding other, like-minded people, people with similar interests, people who already work in design, just, different people could point me in the right direction as far as like, making this a profession, or as far as like, studying this at a collegiate level and all that. So yeah, that was pretty much the motivation in doing it.
Who do you think is like the most impactful person that you've met through social that's like really helped like shift your mindset? Or do you think it's the people that reached out to give you an opportunity to get into footwear, or like is there like a couple people that like just have just always been there to support you on your journey?
There's a couple people. The first person I ever reached out to, like, that's a professional designer, Salehi.
Oh,
Salehi
nice.
Bembury. Yeah, so he was the first person I ever reached out. He was still at Great Brand. So this is like pre-Versace
This was
and pre
back
all
then,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so this was a while ago. And he was the first person I reached out to in design. He gave me a couple tips and pointers in his very Salehi way. So, and I still like, hold those things dear. So that was one thing that was inspiring, especially because it's like I knew that design in general doesn't have a lot of people who look like me. So I'm like, I'm gonna find, a designer who would understand some of the special nuances that come with being Black in design. So that's why initially I reached out to Salehi. But I also, like, whenever I would post things, would tag like, designers I really looked up to. So whether that was Dolce, Djokovic, Mark Miner. So those were the Nike turned Adidas guys. So that's those are like some of the early people I reached out to. I knew Tanker Hatfield wasn't on social media, so I was like, that's not even gonna happen. So just like finding other designers who do have like social presence. And then Dwayne Edwards. I actually never went to Pencil. Always wanted to, but really like never had the chance to between college, high school. And it's like there was always something happening. So it's just something that I haven't done, and I'm not necessarily opposed to doing it now. But always like kept in contact, kept in touch with Dwayne, and
Yeah,
like
Dwayne's a rock star, man. He's
yeah, he's great.
so
Like,
critical in this industry. So what he's been able
right.
to do over the past 10 years is just so tremendous.
Yeah, I've been and that's the thing. Like, I was so like happy to like actually like finally meet this man and everything. So it's he's been another person who's just been great in my early development. You're gonna hear some noise in the background. My house is an old Victorian, so
Oh, good.
yeah, it does that thing.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, guys, I record this podcast through Zoom. Like, it's more about the quality of the content, not the quality of the audio. Like,
Okay.
we're here to like have a conversation that's raw and authentic, and you're gonna hear weird shit. You're gonna hear sirens go by. I live next
Yeah.
door to the street. What do you want from me?
Yeah, this is steam radiators, so it's crazy. It's gonna sound like pots and pans in the background, but it's just the heat.
He's also cooking in the background too. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. But yeah, so just really finding people that I looked up to, and could really start a conversation around. So it was the Adidas, Nike turned Adidas guys, gave me the first opportunity that led to me being at the Brooklyn Farm.
And this, what year was this for context for people listening?
Let's see, that was 2016 when I started working at the farm.
I was gonna guess around 16. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the end of 2016.
There was articles online of you being like one of the youngest employees or something like that at Adidas, or I don't remember exactly what the articles were.
Yeah, so I guess like allegedly the youngest designer to work at Adidas. So that was pretty interesting.
Allegedly.
Yeah, apparently there were like a couple people who might have like edged me out by like a day or so or something like that. So yeah, I'm like, okay, like that's fine. It was never really about the whole being the youngest thing for me. I
Totally.
was like, oh, by the way, like, I also happen to be like wild young. And it was a really interesting experience.
So
I learned
how long
things.
did you do it for? And what was like that process like? Because
Uh,
this was before college, right?
yeah. So I was still in high school. It was some shit, but it was basically I had 8 months there. So that was from December to like Mayish, something like that.
Okay.
So oh no, it was like maybe December to August. Um, so it was quite an experience. So I was still like living in Jersey, so it would be this whole thing of like, and I had enough credits to graduate high school from my junior year that I could basically skip half of every day senior year. So basically they just let me go at like 10:30 or 11 a.m. and then it's like now I'm on my way to Brooklyn like every day. Shit was mad annoying. I had to take New Jersey Transit and MTA, do all of that. It was like an hour and a half there and there and then another hour and a half back. So it
Wait,
was
so you,
really irritating.
your senior year of high school, you went like for 4 hours in the morning, then hopped on an hour and a half train.
Yeah, like if you didn't see me between the hours of maybe 8 and 10, you didn't see me. Like I was on my way to work or at work. I get back home at around like 7, and then there I am. But for a nice chunk of my day, like every day in senior year, I'd just be missing, off to work. So it was an interesting like thing as far as like commuting and stuff like that. But overall, like going there, got to learn from and meet a lot of like incredible people, like designers some designers I do have like weird relationships with now, but some of them like have been hugely inspirational for me, and it's like people I still and always look up to. Um, and it was great, like being able to contribute to something like that, or just be a part of like the foundational Brooklyn Farm experience, like and seeing it grow from the like one floor studio and what is Sunset Park, Industry City, and then seeing them move up to Greenpoint and build out this entire space, and just getting to collaborate with so many people there. So like Jean Khalif, Molly Goddard, and like just people who would just be in the studio, out the studio. Yeah, it was overall just a great, great like learning experience, because it's like, think about it, when you get to art school, there's no footwear design major. It's not a thing. So it's like you have to really hold on to these experiences and like really learn as much as you can while you're there. So that was pretty interesting,
So
and it was great.
were you actually like drawing alongside these designers, or were you just it was more of like a like an internship kind of information thing, or were you actually like hands on in the process?
A bit of both. So I was doing like just watching and learning, but also like contributing to whatever they felt like I was best at, or whatever I could contribute. Then now there was some frustration with that, especially with the whole pretense of them moving to Brooklyn to like sort of, I guess, on a macro perspective, like extract and synthesize culture. So there's like some conflict with that, where it's like I don't necessarily know how I feel about that. Even in like in hindsight, I'm still kind of about it. But it was like overall like got to work on certain things, got to like certain develop certain skills. The honestly, I feel like the most valuable skills that I learned there, not only navigating the corporate space, but also like opening or growing up some of my like physical skill sets. So working in the maker lab and actually learning how to make shoes and understanding like the design and production process beyond like theory and sketching, because it's one thing to sketch a crazy ass shoe, but it's another thing to think about how are they going to make this. So working in the maker lab really gave me a nice set of skills for that, and taught me how to sew before I got to college, so that was pretty fun. But yeah, I gained a healthy set of skills there, met amazing people, and that was the Brooklyn Farm experience. It was interesting for a lot of reasons,
It
but
sounds like you've covered everything from just absorbing knowledge from a watching perspective, but then also a drawing perspective, and then you just hit the nail on the head, the making process, which still to this day there are professional designers out there who just draw and they don't understand it.
yeah,
They've never been to a factory, they've never created a pattern, they've never sewn, they've never done these things, and you got a crash course in 8 months. At 16 years old, 17 years old?
Yeah, I was 17. I was 17 by then, and then 18 by the end of it. So it was something. So, and also getting to learn from people who aren't all footwear designers. Like,
Sure.
there's Hussein, who he's an incredible 3D designer, and I feel like
Yeah.
designer even puts it in a box. Like, he's godlike. Like, I really he amazes me, like, with everything that he does. So there's Hussein, there's Sam McCallier. So he does a ton of like the graphic design work, or he did a ton of the graphic design work while he was there. It was great to see how he works. And then there were people from like these sort of odds and end categories that you wouldn't always think about, but there's like incredible talent there. So we have like Eric from like he's doing like all the football sports, well, American football. Uh, there there's so many different people. Adrian from soccer, uh, Dylan, rest in peace, from he was doing basketball, and I got the chance to work with him. It was a lot of like really 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 amazing people from all these different categories of the company. So it was great to have that experience. So as much as I look back on it in sort of a conflicted way, there there was a lot of like amazing things that happened there. So
I mean, from an outsider's perspective, it's just an opinion, but like a lot of people would kill to have those 8 months, and I
yeah,
think it's super special that they provide, regardless of where it resides today. I think from a holistic perspective, it's pretty amazing.
yeah, it's a great learning experience, and I really wish that design education for footwear was more like that in general. So it was something that even going to Parsons, it was something I wanted to almost replicate in some aspects of like my Parsons experience. So that's why like even I went into Parsons as a product design major. I have like the Parsons product design, they don't do soft goods, and I don't really have an interest in learning how to make chairs for 4 years if I want to go for footwear. So
Wait, hold on. Before we go into shitting on furniture, let's back up real quick. What after the 8 months, right? You obviously have developed all these skills. You've enhanced a lot of even your sketching and understanding of footwear design. Who made the decision or influenced your decision to go to college versus just going into the industry? Because I'm assuming that you probably could have done that.
yeah, and that was the thing. And it was a long debate for me of like, is it worth going to school to just doing the straight industry route? And it was interesting because while I was there, I actually had two people there who both were working in the same office, but both went like different routes, and they've known each other for years. So it was Nick Diber and Alan Largen. So they were like neck and like sort of like neck and neck, and they've known each other for a while. And Nick went straight corporate route, just straight intern to starting designer and secondary designer. And Alan, he went to CCS, so he did the college route. And for me personally, like I wanted this personally, I wanted the ability to sort of not necessarily be tied to a company based on like my progress at this one particular company.
Sure.
So it's like it sort of secures upward mobility, but can potentially restrict like lateral mobility. So it's like you can't necessarily jump around from company to company because all of your work has only been validated at this one brand. And it's not to say that that's the case for him, but it's just like I know that the rules are a bit different for Black people in design. So it's like I know that for me to be even like believed as a designer, it's like I kind of have to get this design degree, and it's not something I'm thrilled about, but here we are. So year 4 of Parsons, but yeah, I figured like the rules do work a little different, so I do have to get this design degree. And it was weird because I knew like quite a few designers like had started at Parsons, never finished, or started at Pratt, never finished. Yeah, and it's just like me, I'm like I kind of like have to go to school, so I'm like it's something I'm gonna have to deal with, and
We
I'm dealing
talked
with
about
it now.
this even on Clubhouse the other week, right? It's like maybe in the future, maybe in 5-10 years, it won't be as necessary to get it, that specific piece of paper, that degree, to have that check mark on a resume. But I still think today it
Right.
does elevate.
And for some people, it's not necessary, and it's really crazy how it works. And a lot of it is like because design is gate kept on sort of like this. It's sort of socioeconomically gate kept. So that's a big part of the design industry. A lot of it is like it's a lot of like rich white buddy pass nepotism kind of setup going on there. and it's like that doesn't extend to everybody. And it's just like being aware that it doesn't extend to everybody is going to save you a lot of headaches. It may cost you a lot of money, but it's going to save you a lot of headaches because it's weird because it's like these people want degrees, but there's no such thing as a footwear design degree. So how exactly does that work? It's like you want me to have a degree for something that I'm not even going to be doing in my everyday job. And it's just like it basically the degree requirements from like a lot of the footwear companies just exist as a glass ceiling.
Sure.
And it's just like it's something that if I knew I wanted to really, really do this as a profession, I'm going to need the degree to get through the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's
That's a crazy tough thing to have to go through at such a young age to like
right.
decide and like understand, and like the way you're able to speak and articulate about this stuff is really incredible. Just like from my perspective of like how you're able to like come up with these thoughts and then process them, you know, professionally, even like as a word or way about it. But you even started talking about before I interrupted, just to come full circle.
Okay.
About you got into Parsons, you go into it, and they're like, they don't even have soft goods, let alone footwear design, is what you just said.
Right.
So how are you making your way now, 4 years into it? How did you make your way to, one, make your stamp align with the school, but also make it align with what your beliefs and what you want to do, right? How do you separate the furniture design that I hate to like what I want to do in the same education?
Yeah. So going in a product design, going on like as product, well, that was my declared major, but you know, we all have foundation year. So they basically throw everything at you. You have like maybe one of your like major courses, but everything else is just sort of the Parsons first year course catalog. So and you get to meet everybody in all these different majors and everything. You get to see what other people's interests are. And it's like, you know, what are you allowed to do in your major? And I knew some product design guys, and it's like, as much as I, you know, do love product design, and it's not strictly like chairs, but and even chairs, it's like that's fine. It's just not what I want to do. So I'm like, it's okay that you want to design chairs for 4 years. It's okay with me. It's just not necessarily what I want to do. So seeing that, and then also, you know, seeing people who are fashion majors and graphic design majors and all these other things, I'm like, I'm spending the school, like, you know, room and board, everything, tuition included. It's $75,000 a year.
It's that
Absolutely
much?
ridiculous. Yes, it's $75,000 a year.
Holy
I have a
shoot.
scholarship that covers some of it, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, some of it. I mean, there's still a boatload
right,
left.
exactly. So it's like think about the scholarship as like, you know, taking the cherry off the top of the sundae, and then you have to figure out what to do with
That's
the rest of the sundae.
wild.
Exactly. So there was that. So just knowing that I'm coughing up a ton of fucking money to go here. So I'm like, I might as well get the most that I can out of this. So and I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do that in product design, especially if I wanted to go into footwear after this. So I switched over to integrated design, which at any other school would just call interdisciplinary design. So
Okay.
basically I took that and had to sort of create a pathway that's between fashion and product, because that's probably the closest you're going to get to anything like sneakers. But also, like, you know, leaves the door open for you to explore product design in your own way and explore fashion in your own way. And also, I felt like, you know, studying fashion is really important if you're going to go into footwear. Because
Sure.
one thing that I did notice, like, you know, in working in footwear at the farm, and also because I've worked in footwear all throughout college too. So one thing that I was noticing is like there's sneaker people who are strictly sneaker people. Like, you know, as almost like as if people wear sneakers naked, like just walk outside and all they wear is sneakers. And it's like, I feel like, you know, in order to really better serve the community, better serve the consumer and all that, it would be better if, like, you know, we understood fashion theory a bit more. Because it's
Sure.
like, you know, the sneakers aren't being worn just with socks and underwear. It's like people have outfits that are going with this. So it's like understanding, you know, what's trending in fashion or what's trending in, like, you know, personal style, that's important. So being able to understand a bit more of that while I'm also designing footwear, I feel like that's been a bit of an influence. Um, so that's been big for me. And then
So you
also, you
sort
know,
of like developed your own path. You sounds like you
yeah,
created kind of your literally own degree path.
yeah, it's kind of like DIY to major. And like the degree is, you know, integrated design. But, you know, what I made integrated design mean for me is sort of like, you know, bespoke. Like I don't know anybody else in this pathway because there's not too many people who go into sneakers like that,
Sure. I mean, but
especially
that's
at Parsons.
that is pretty cool that they allowed you, or they allow other people to do that as well.
Right, for 74,000, yeah. Like, and it's really like Parsons. I do not like that school. Like, I really cannot stand Parsons. Like, it is a horrible institution that is just dressed up and overpriced. And I'm like, okay, it's too late now. Like, I like in sophomore year, I contemplated dropping out of it, but I'm like, fuck it, I already spent like, I have how much in student loan debt?
Yeah.
Might as well get the degree. So,
Yeah.
and that's what I did.
You
That's what I'm
graduated
doing.
when? In
I
May?
graduated in May.
Yeah. Okay, so you're
Yeah,
close.
so yeah,
Real
right,
close.
almost done. So I guess like after all of that, I might as well get the degree and like just get that out of the way and then start paying for it until I'm presumably 75.
Man, dude, I still got like another 8 or 9 or 10 years left or something like that. I can't even look at it anymore. Just
Yeah,
my bank account every month, and I'm like lost money.
that's what I just stopped. Like I stopped looking at it. I don't want to know how much I owe. I know that it is so bad that I could buy a house in all 50 states. Yeah, so I'm just like, gee, like come on now. But
So
it is what it is. So I'm like, that's basically what I've gotten to. Like it is what it is, and it's like that's the cost of Parsons. And it's been and also like I feel like from a cultural, social, and like political standpoint, it is like almost radicalizing, like to see like to think about the fact that your education costs so much. So that was something that, and also thinking about like what design wages are. And I'm like,
especially out of school, dude.
Right. And I'm like, y'all want 74, 75 a year, but my salary is 70. I'm very confused as to how you're like, who's doing this math?
If
It's like
you
y'all
get
aren't
70 out of college, I mean that's a good starter.
right. And I'm like, yeah, it should at least be that. Like if you don't want me to be poor forever, like if you actually plan on paying me, that would be great.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense that our educations, cost a $250,000. Like that's somehow our education in a degree that doesn't exist. So we have to go get this education for a degree that doesn't really exist. And we have to pay, roughly, $250,000 for it. And then, we get these standard jobs that are, or after graduation, you're dealing with $15 an hour for what? Like for, internships. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And it's like, we should be happy to even get that.
Now, how does that make sense if minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour everywhere, right? And then you're gonna toss somebody $50K after an educated degree that you cost them $250,000. How do you justify paying them $50K or $60K a year when they could just go work $15 an hour and make close to the same amount of money?
That was my whole thing was like, and this is like my relationship with Adidas started to really deteriorate around the time, like, because I was scheduled to come back after a year at Parsons. And the whole thing was, it's like, I have like real bills now. So I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, below 15 an hour, I could make that at Wendy's, like quite literally, because New York State's, their minimum wage is 15 an hour.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm sitting here, I clock in after the crazy ass travel. I clock in and I'm making $15 an hour. And in the process, forking over all of my intellectual property to you, that you can do whatever you want with at any given point now or in the future. And I'm still only seeing $15 an hour. And that's before I spend the $300 a month in transportation to get here and back. So I'm like, this is basically unpaid. So it just wasn't right. And it was like, it just wasn't adding up. And it's like, when you go and you explain these things, it's like, it's like, look, I need a raise. It's like, oh, and then suddenly it's like, quote, you're not worth it. I'm like, interesting, because it was like everything was all good until you ask for it to be paid, like, what you're owed. And that's the thing, like a lot of designers, like, because of like knowing that that's how it goes, like are afraid to speak up for themselves. So I was just like, that's just simply like this relationship isn't equitable, because it's like you're accruing, millions of dollars. And it's like working somewhere, and it's like I became aware of the fact that there were people in my role who were not Black being paid much more than me. I also found out that I made roughly 2% of my boss's salary. And I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like, this is exploitation, like cut plain and simple.
Yeah.
Design talent is being exploited. And it's like, it's not just unique to, what was happening at Adidas. It's common across all these industries. Like like the unpaid internship, how the fuck does that fly? Like, how does that make sense? And it's like, this isn't like, it's an internship or an apprenticeship under like, your local jeweler or something, like, somebody who doesn't have a ton of resources to, pay their younger talent. That company pulled down $20 billion that year. And I'm like, you can't find it in there to pay people a living wage?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, y'all coughed over, what was it, $350 million to James Harden? And you can't find it anywhere in the books to pay your interns a living wage? And that was just something that made no sense to me. And I'm like, just seeing like, the amount of money that this company spends on things. And I'm like, you won't pay for labor. And it's so strange. And it's like, when you think about that's the way the interns are treated, it really does make you think about like, labor exploitation in factories and things like that. So I'm like, the name of the game, like, in American capitalism is exploitation. So it's like, I got that. And I just couldn't get behind that notion anymore. So it's like, the whole, I'm going to pay you less than what you deserve or anything like that. It became like, really frustrating to think about. So it was something where it's like, just going forward, it just wasn't something I was interested in. So I began to explore like, doing the consulting route instead of like, just straight up interning everywhere. And it's like, also I was building a lot of skills, both like, these quantifiable, really big things to put on a resume, like, Parsons, Adidas Brooklyn Farm before I went to Parsons and stuff like that. So it's like just steadily, adding new experience and things like that, and like, really growing in it. Like, and I feel like Puma that was my second, like, I guess big job. And that was really the experience that was, was sort of eye-opening for me.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
You want to talk about that? When did you
do sure.
internship?
So I ended up at Puma, like, because I was at the farm, weirdly enough. So basically while I was at the farm, I'd actually met Mike Packer. So he's, Jersey sneaker royalty. So meeting him, he actually put me on with Ryan Cross, who was at Puma at the time. And they were basically like rebuilding Puma hoops, after the 20 to 25 year hiatus from the market. And basically they wanted new designers they were looking like, for somebody new to help sort of establish their design direction, or like, some of their design identity, or more so like explore it. And I ended up getting looped into that opportunity, and it was great to learn from Jacob, who like at the time was the only other like, footwear designer in hoops. So it was crazy. Like it was a one-man team just handling.
This was before Jeremy came on board?
Yeah, it was before Jeremy.
Okay.
So Jeremy got there a little later. So it was just crazy to see that that's how I was working there. And in my time there, like it was great to really see like this entire process of like, how this goes from sketch to, tech pack and stuff like that. And that's where actually I kind of like, solidified a lot more of my Illustrator skills and stuff like that. So that was, as far as like, getting my digital design down, like that was like transformative. Like I love that experience. It was great.
Was this during college or no?
Yeah, it was during college. So This was actually because the Adidas situation had like fallen apart, let's see, in May of 2018. And by like the first week of June, I'd somehow finessed the Puma job. So I was like, wow. Right. So I was like, thank you. It was an incredible finesse. Great experience either way. And it was really interesting because when I went there, because I was able to make the amount of money that I had previously asked, Adidas, a company with much more money than Puma.
Sure.
Previously, I was able to make exactly what I asked for with no fuss or anything like that, because I wasn't asking for anything crazy in the first place. So
I was just asking to just pay my bus bill.
Right. And I'm like, I'd like to have, heat and Wi-Fi. So I'm like,
I'm sorry for laughing. It's just such a wild conversation.
Yeah, the shit was crazy. And I'm like, it's interesting how someone like the dialogue around you can go from like, oh, this really super talented, young, motivated, but then you ask for like a living wage and suddenly like, oh, you're ungrateful. Like, son, like it's cold in my house. like yeah, I was like, I can't get behind that. But Puma, like, you know, and also I got a contract that was unbelievable. Like I thought I was reading it wrong, not in terms of like, you know, the money that was being paid out, but I kept a lot of my intellectual property. Like I was able to own it. And I was like, wait. I thought they don't do this for
Did
designers,
you
but they
put
don't
that in
do
your
this.
contract or they did?
No, it was
Huh.
in there. I was like, wow, okay. Because like, you know, the thing is like you hear in design, especially you're a younger designer, but like you hear that these things just don't happen. They do. It's like it's all like, you know, they pick and choose who it happens for. But luckily enough, like, you know, I was able to have a contract for all the stuff that I did for Puma that doesn't make it to production. I still own. And it's great because like, you know, you don't want to have an idea that can translate to like multiple brands, but you can't even discuss it because another brand technically owns it. And
Gotcha.
it's like by even like implementing it in something else, like you then clog up a whole bunch of other shit, and like then if it makes it to market, then you've got a big legal issue on your hands. And that was just something that I was just like so glad and like, you know, happy to see existed for me, or like that was an option. So I was really happy to see that was the case with the Puma deal. So like in terms of like business wise, that was really sort of like next level for me. I couldn't believe that was happening.
How
But
long
yeah,
were
that
you
was
at
the deal
Puma?
with Puma. Hmm?
How long were you at Puma?
I was at Puma for I want to say like 6 months or so.
Okay, that's a decent
Yeah,
chunk of time.
yeah. So I was doing it because I did Puma through my whole summer, and then
Did
also
you
like
go up to
into my fall
Boston
semester.
or you went
Yeah.
up? Oh, you did. Okay.
So I was in Boston, and it was the thing. I was sort of like back and forth between like New York and Boston. It was fine. Really great learning experience. Like shout out to Jacob. Like he's great mentor. Like it's and because all of these people like also look at them as like, you know, other than colleagues and designers, like they're professors for me because there is no sneaker professor at Parsons. So it's like all these different people are teaching me all these different skills. So it was great to, you know, really get a chance to work with them, and also just doing like and it was a brand that like, you know, I know Puma, love Puma, but it was interesting to like, you know, see how does it work to start a brand from what's basically scratch,
Sure.
because like nobody's seen like, you know, Puma hoops in my entire lifetime. And that was another really crazy thing. Jacob can remember like, you know, the last Puma basketball shoes. He might have been like 10 years old when it happened, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
All of that ended before I started breathing. So it was really interesting to, you know, really sort of explore that and recreate it. So that was like, you know, a great experience for me. So that was one of them that was amazing.
That's awesome, man. And then, so talk about, you know, present day, you're going to wrap up your degree in a couple months, right? You've
Yeah.
now had these two major companies that you've been able to interact with and create for. You know, talk about what are some of the things that you want to do after graduation? You know, it sounds like you've just shared polarizingly different experiences, right? How do you find a balance moving forward? Is there something that you're specifically looking for? Or you plan on doing your own thing, or maybe you just don't want to share any of it? I don't know. Just I'm asking you, like, what are your goals for over the next couple months as you graduate?
For the next couple months, well, to preface, I guess like, but after Puma, there was still like, you know, a couple other companies that I worked for in between. But at one point and I had always had a LLC like for design, so like, you know, as an independent contractor.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and then I started then I like, you know, made a second one that, you know, I really am still working on now and wanted to be, you know, a more holistic, like serious, very much real consultancy, and it's what I do all of my work under right now. But I
Oh, so
started it in collaboration. Hmm?
you have your own design consultancy technically that you're like filing
Yeah,
taxes and stuff under.
yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's what I do all of my work under, and
Congratulations,
I
man.
started.
That's a huge step.
Thanks, and it's something that I feel like is really important for a lot of younger designers to really, you know, wrap our minds around, because it's like because if you leave it up to these brands, they will give you $15 an hour and act like that's normal. So it's like if you don't like we do need to have like, you know, some sort of agency over our own work. So I started it in collaboration with one of my peers and like close friends from Parsons, Matthew Moran. So we started that together, and it's been something I've just been like working on and working under for the past let's see, I started maybe about 18 months to 2 years, something like that. Time flies. But so basically that's just been something I've been working on recently, and that's the consultancy. So that's what's allowed me to work for a couple of different brands and like, you know, really expand my portfolio and things like that. And also, like, I got the chance to work with Jason Maiden, who I cannot say enough about. Like, that man is incredible. Ron Allen, like the team over at Super Heroic, absolutely amazing people. Like that, like honestly, like they make me so optimistic about design. Like to see that, like, you know, these things are possible. So
Hell yeah.
definitely shout out to them. That's another like top 5, top 3 experience for me.
So how are you finding your clients for your consultancy? I mean, listen, it goes without saying for the listeners, right? You're in college, which diverts enough attention. You're commuting back and forth to the city. You're doing these crazy things, and then on top of that, you're like, you know, fuck it, I'm just gonna start freelancing. How, like, one, how do you juggle all of those different things, and then two, like, how are you finding your clientele, or people reaching out to you to, hey, do you want to do some work for us?
Yeah, well, once I got to college, like while I was on college, like, you know, staying like on campus. So it's like that, like getting rid of the travel thing was night and day. It's insanely expensive. Parsons has the most expensive dorming in the country. Yeah, and that's like, you know, it is the most expensive as in number one over Yale, Harvard, NYU, all of them. Parsons has the most expensive dorming.
Okay.
Right. So
Parsons will never sponsor this podcast.
no, that's fine. Honestly, I don't even plan on like jacking Parsons after I graduate. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I served a brief stint at Parsons. I was locked up at the new school, but like that was one thing. But like getting rid of the whole, like, you know, travel thing, even though it was wild expensive, worth it. It freed up so much time in my day and all that, so it was worth it for me. Not worth what they cost, but, you know, worth it for, you know, getting the work out. So as far as, like, you know, finding that balance, I think for a lot of school, like even like, you know, before college and stuff like that, you know, typing essays, stuff like that, doing research, it's never been like too much of a huge like Herculean task for me. Like I enjoy writing, and it's like I do enjoy like some scholarly, like, you know, things like that's always been a part of it. So it wasn't really necessarily a huge hurdle with school. Of course, like, you know, there'd be times like there's just too much shit going on right now for that. But at the same time, it's like I feel like my dedication to, you know, advancing footwear, exploring footwear has always, you know, been that strong where it's like, look, I'll make time for it. Like if it's something like, you know, I want to get done. It's like also you see people who, a lot of times it'd be people who reach out to me and I just be like, oh, okay, I can clear some time. Yeah, I can work on it. So it'd just be, let's get this job done and let's just start it. So that'd be like, you know, how a lot of like, you know, opportunities will find their way to me.
So
Or
they're
it's
like
just like, you
they're
know,
word of mouth, or the people reaching out on social, or
word of mouth, people reaching out on social. And then also there's a thing where it's like, I heard a long time ago that it's like your name is in conversations you're not aware about. So it's like stuff like that. You're like, oh, wow. You're like, oh, I heard from such and such, or, oh, I met this and that person who met you at the farm. They need somebody like this here. And I'm like, okay, great. I'll take it. So it just be, you know, opportunities like that. And then it's like, I really appreciate those and the people who, you know, facilitate those. Also it'd be reaching out to people where it's like, you know, I can see that there's somewhere where it's like, you know, you may need a new design talent for that. And it's weird to sort of proposition people like that because it's like, with all due respect to the designers that are there, but it's like sometimes, like, you know, people don't, especially if like because now in design so much of design is sold under this sometimes pseudo pretense of culture. So that's a huge thing in design right now. The whole it's cultural, but it's like a lot of times people don't really know what that means. It's like a buzzword that people throw around, but it has no substance behind it. So that's been another thing for me, like, you know, finding a way to integrate design and culture together. I kind of have like this informal minor in sociology, so that's another thing that comes into my design education. So figuring out how to integrate culture without like doing the whole, like, you know, extract and synthesize thing with culture, which is really frustrating. It's something that you see a lot in professional design. And that was one of the big things that irked me kind of about, like, you know, working with the farm. Where it's like, you know, you travel all this way and, you know, set up this post in Brooklyn, but it's already being gentrified. And it's like, you don't really connect with the culture. And it's like, in some aspects, not really connecting with the culture. Like, you know, you're kind of scared of the neighborhood and stuff like that. And it's just like, you're never really going to get the culture like that. It's like, oh, you're looking for the culture at the Met. The culture is not at the Met. I'm sorry. Like, that is, old shit is in the Met. Like, sometimes it's beautiful old shit, but old shit. Like it's that's not where New York's like, street culture. It's not
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
fashion, the style, and all of that is coming from. It's not coming from like, these sanitary, cutesy, trendy white neighborhoods. That's never been where New York's culture came from. So it's like, unless you want to do, I don't know if you want to do like, maybe a Scarface or Sopranos collab, like then maybe I'm like, you want like Goodfellas sneakers? Sure. Then you can stay downtown. But it's like, if you really want stuff that's authentic and things like that, you do have to leave out of these areas. You have to leave your socio-political comfort zone, or like, your cultural comfort zones. And yeah, like if New York's like most stylistic and like, fashion forward neighborhoods are in Harlem, what are you doing in Greenpoint? It's like, what are you doing in Williamsburg? It's like that's not gonna do it. And it's like, and that's always been a thing for me. Like, design under the pretense of culture involves you actually submerging yourself in culture. So that's been a big thing for me, and figuring out and just sort of like bringing that to wherever I go. So it's like or integrating that into the work that I do. Like most recently, I've done like this terror mimicry project that's based in my personal experiences, like over the summer, and like reconnecting with nature after quarantine and stuff like that. And then it's also informed by like childhood memories of like the ACG brand and stuff like that, and what that meant growing up in Jersey in the 2000s. So it's like bringing stuff like that together, but it's not like overarchingly like it doesn't feel like just a shoe project dressed up in like after the fact, like, oh, let's throw cultural lingo in there on it. It's like, no, it's like, this is just part of how my design process went. So it's like trying to create these organic happenings of culture and design really intersecting. That's been one thing. And like getting people to understand, or explaining like those intersections to people who find them valuable, or people who want to achieve them. That's been something that's it's worked for me, as far as finding clients in some cases, or just like finding opportunities that work for me. And yeah, that's pretty much how I work that.
That's amazing, man. Well, again, congrats on the so far success on the freelance work, because even like this day and age, it's like, with throughout COVID and things like that, people getting laid off, like so many people started their own businesses and other things. So it's wicked competitive, and let alone footwear design in general is competitive. Then the freelance community is super competitive. So it's definitely hard to one, make a name for yourself, and then two, stand out, and then three,
Right.
be able to insert what your motives and where you like what you believe in into another company's energy. So that's tremendous. And like, so going back to the previous question of like, how do you inform yourself on the decisions you're going to make after graduation of, what projects do you take on? Are you going to continue the freelance stuff, or are you going to try to find, let's call it a stable job, working for another brand? Obviously you have your key things that you're not going to let go. Like, for example, I'm assuming that you're going to negotiate certain things if it was on the brand side of things, or are you leaning at this point more towards the freelance world because you've had some success and, you're enjoying the work you're working on?
Well, since COVID, and just seeing like how that happened, and seeing how it's happening still, I think that for myself, I do want a bit more stability. Like, as much as I love the freedom of like freelancing, having all this agency over my work, stability is important. Health insurance, even more important. So that's like one of the things that's like some of these things have become more so priorities in work. So I definitely am looking for something a bit more stable for the next couple of years. That doesn't mean, now to me, that doesn't mean like abandon private practice and stuff like that.
Sure.
I still plan on keeping my consultancy, and I'm an interdisciplinary designer, so I can think of like there's many different things that I can explore through that consultancy that aren't necessarily shoes, and like there's a lot of different things that that I can design, have designed. I forget that there's like an entirely separate body of work of like things that I've done like in college that have never been seen. It's like things that I've explored in school that have never really seen the outside world or seen any larger platforms. And there's skill sets that I have and haven't really shown off like that. So I understand that like my consultancy can still live even though I'm like doing the whole full-time designer thing at another company. So yeah, right now, currently, it's like looking for a solid, stable design job, And also, like, I'm looking forward to actually working with a team of footwear designers for the first time in a while. And that's something that's always like, really amazing to me. Like I love, outside of like, designing shoes, I love like learning. The process of learning has always been like, really important to me. Like whether it's design learnings, whether it's cultural learnings, social learnings, theory and stuff like that. I enjoy things like that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's good to surround yourself with, other designers. And it's like Matt, he's my partner, great guy. Like, and of course, like we always have like, these conversations around stuff like this. But it's always great to have like, be exposed to like new people and things like that. So
Yeah, definitely. I'm very much an extrovert myself, and like I totally miss working with the team at work and like interacting and just doing weird things, even having conversations at lunch or whatever it is. And it
right.
inspires so many different aspects of the design and creative process that it's definitely missed in right now. And I look forward to, we're reopening our offices very soon, so I look forward to kind of getting back to interacting with people. So I feel you 100% on that.
Yeah.
It's not always forever too. Like you learn, right? And your opinions can change in a couple of years. Maybe you're like, okay, that was enough of that. Let's go figure out something else.
Right.
Are you going to take any time off after you graduate? Or are you planning on just going right into it?
I feel like it's a luxury I can't afford, so I'm gonna have to like go straight into whatever design job I find myself in, and
Yeah.
so that's gonna be something interesting. It's sort of like that straight like pivot from school to getting back into whatever I'm getting into, like, and especially I feel like it'd be especially welcome because my thesis has nothing to do with footwear, so
Doesn't.
yeah, it's nothing to do with footwear, so and so it's going to be interesting. Like a lot of my thought hasn't. It's sort of like I've had like this split on one side. I'm like doing all the terror mimicry stuff, like all the stuff that you've recently seen on like Instagram and stuff like that. So that's occupying like a good 30 or so percent of my creative energy, and then there's the other 70 thinking about how I'm going to explore like the topics I want to explore for thesis. So and I'm getting pretty far in that. Like I've gotten to the conceptual phase and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to like sort of get back into footwear and like really fully be able to invest all of myself into sneakers again. So I am really excited for that opportunity.
Dude, I'm stoked for you. That sounds awesome, and I love that you said it's a luxury I can't afford, and just getting up and
Yeah.
going after it. I treated it the same way when I graduated in 2014. I applied to like over 100 places like 2 months before I graduated. Like I was like, I need a job before I graduate, and then
Right.
I started at Vibram literally 6 weeks before I graduated.
And that's really what you got to do, especially if you're not coming from one of these, where did you go for college?
I went to Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston.
Okay.
I got a degree in industrial design.
Oh, cool. And a lot of people have like, when you go to like, the quote unquote art schools, which is all of it is bullshit. Like you have like, your Pratts, your Parsons and your Cooper Unions and all of those are like your, just like, the big private art schools. The students that go there it's so strange to go to schools like that. And it's like, you don't come from, that stock of person. So it's like, you're not generationally wealthy from like, oh, it's like, oh, my grandfather doesn't work at Condé Nast and stuff like that. And there's a lot of that, like, and I say nepotism not like to be funny. I'm actually dead serious. Like these kids are extremely wealthy. They do not have to be in art school. They don't have to be in any school. Many of them have not had jobs ever. And one thing I didn't know that people do until going to Parsons was it's like, oh, I'm going to go to grad school because I'm not ready for a job yet. I'm not ready for a job yet. I stared in my most West Indian confusion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when I saw that. There's a lot of that of people who are just like extremely wealthy and they're like, look, this whole art shit is just something I do to be in New York and my parents pay for it.
That's such a, I mean, you might as well set a stack of bills on fire at that point.
Right. And they do. And it's like, it's so strange to see like the art industry and like a lot of these, these design positions and things like that, especially in fashion and design. They're just, sort of nepotism, pay to play, very much, and that's why these glass ceilings exist. So it's like, if you have the money to get past it, you can. Like the design is a very much pay to play industry. It's like, very much gate kept, generally by, rich white guys, but then like that's just generally like, that's how design works. So it's really, frustrating to see that it works like that. And it's also like, you see so many people who start these schools and can't finish simply because of, like, the sheer cost. And it goes up like 2% every year.
Yeah.
So it's like the sheer cost is just wiping out so much talent.
And we didn't even talk about how universities and colleges are keeping the same costs throughout COVID, when kids aren't actually there and learning and hands-on like that. We don't need to talk about that, but that's that to me blows my brain out of my face.
This shit is crazy, because it's like, y'all, and then have the audacity to be like, can you please turn your camera on? Are you shitting me? It's like, y'all have me on FaceTime, and you are charging me $45,000 to be on FaceTime with you. They tried to charge me for room and board.
Yeah, that's wild.
This semester, and I'm like, you're gonna charge me for being in my own house? These people are insane. So I'm like, just like that alone, and just seeing like the monster that is, like, that is the design education experience. It's crazy to, like, just seeing like people who made it out of there, especially if are of the people who, quote unquote, aren't supposed to make it. So it's like, if you're coming from poor to middle class, working poor, you made it through design school. Oh my God. And that's for anybody. So that's like, that's for poor working class white folks. That's for this, but especially like, for poor working class, like, Black people, Latin people, people who, maybe queer, non-binary, any of these other things. So if you have any other, marginalized identity working on top of the fact that you don't have a whole bunch of money, it's almost impossible to make it through these art schools. So it's like, I honestly, just like making it through that is a triumph, but it's like, it's crazy that on top of that, you don't even have the luxury to just be like, all right, whew, like you don't get to even exhale. It's like immediately, especially right now, it's like immediately you have to turn that into profit and stuff like that. So it's a bit vicious at times, but it is, what you have to navigate to make it in art and design. And it's like, I really wish it wasn't like that. I don't feel like, and I feel this way about a lot of things, wealth shouldn't be the prerequisite for access. Like, I don't think that that's necessary, because it's like, who's to say if this, like, say this kid, like, is from like Idaho or some shit, and his parents are potato farmers, and collectively like make like maybe, I don't know, Idaho, let's say they make $70,000 a year put together. Why is that a barrier from them going into, design as a profession?
I remember when I applied, and so just to give you some context, so I'm an immigrant from Poland. My parents came over not speaking the language. I grew up. You called out poor to middle class, like that's exactly how I grew up and stuff like that. And I remember applying to Wentworth to be an architecture major because I was always drawing houses younger. And they're like, "Do you have a portfolio?" I'm like, "No, I don't have a portfolio. I didn't go to art high school." Like
I'm fucking poor.
And they're like, "Well, pick a different major and we'll accept you." It was like the biggest backhanded compliment. I talk about this all the time. The biggest backhanded compliment I've ever received. But granted, I went there, picked civil engineering, hated fucking civil engineering. It was terrible. Then I found industrial design and I loved it. So like now it's like, it's wild to think about, like, I probably would have been a decent architect, but you had no idea.
But wealth is somehow the prerequisite for access. And I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I hate that that's like how so much stuff works, especially in this country. Like, it's everything is pay to play. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. It's like you're robbing yourself. Or like these industries and these institutions are robbing themselves of so much talent, in the place of money that they already have.
Yeah.
And it's like that one student and their like, little $45,000 was not gonna make a difference. And it's like, y'all have billions of dollars to sit on, and you are robbing the world. You're robbing the design community. You're robbing consumers of like all these wonderful experiences and products and insights and stuff, all because you made wealth a prerequisite for access to these things. And it's sick. Yeah. And it's like you have to face these same people claiming to be like, oh, we're a progressive institution for the arts. Bullshit. And it's like, and they want to look at you like crazy. Like if there was a Parsons person on the call right now, they'd be like, well, what? There's nothing, like, what are you going to tell me? I did it like 4 years.
Yeah.
Like, are you shitting me? Like, I've seen it. Like, this isn't like, it's not speculation. This is like, I've experienced, this is what art school is.
This is fact. Yeah. It's not an opinion. This is
right. I'm like, this is verifiable, quantifiable. Like, it's just as real as you and me. Like,
yeah.
that is the experience. And it's like, I thought about transferring for a while. I thought I might go to Pratt. I also have a friend who goes to Pratt, and she's like, oh yeah, it's the same shit over here. Like, all of these
Well,
schools work the same.
we can only hope the education system in general changes over the next course of, you know, our lifetime, hopefully,
Right.
for younger generations. I am hopeful. Maybe I'm a little bit of a blind optimist, but I think people are making real stabs at it and trying
Yeah.
to, like the Dwayne Edwards is, like,
Right. Dwayne is like, I can't thank him enough, like, on behalf of everybody that's going through that. Like, just making this, you know, other way for people to get through. And it's just like, that's necessary. It's like, he shouldn't even have to do that though.
yeah.
Like, he shouldn't have to. And it's like, so many, like, so much stuff, like, you know, people just accept, you know, these institutions are the way they are, and they're not. They're made up of people.
Yeah, exactly. 1000%.
People. Man. Like, these institutions are not like, you know, some pervasive force like gravity or something like that. No, they're made up. Like, they're constructed. And not even like constructed thousands of years ago. Parsons was started in the 1900s. Like, you know, there was thousands of years of human civilization before this got here. So it's like, we can work our way around these things. So it's like, we just really need to get past these ideas of like I'm saying, like, you know, capitalism, wealth is like, you know, you can't do anything without wealth. I'm like, this is ridiculous. But things just aren't accessible to people based on where they live, where they come from, based on immigration status and stuff like that. I'm like, what the hell does any of that have to do with design?
Yeah.
And it's like, if these, you know, institutions were, you know, as forward as, you know, they claim to be, they wouldn't have anything to do with design. Like, anybody would be able to come here and study and, you know, explore their creative potential to the fullest. Because there's so many, like, of these just places, like, there's so many, like, asses and seats at Parsons who are just rich, and that's it. Not even talented. And I don't say this, like, you know, from like a pretentious perspective. I said, and they know this and will admit it too. Where it's like, you know, I'm not that good at this. So it's like, my dad makes X amount of millions of dollars a year. Or it's like, oh, my dad.
You have all these kids around the United States who don't know that they're creative because they haven't been exposed. It's like, we're all products of our environment. You grow up in this situation and you don't even know that you can draw or create or do this. And
because your school don't got arts.
Yeah, it's very wild.
It's sick.
We've Nigel, this has been amazing. We've been chatting for over an hour. We could probably talk for another 3 hours. I want to ask you one other question before we wrap up, right? Like, if you had to give one message to anybody listening on, you know, whether that's watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple, once this launches, is like, what would you give people as, like, you know, feedback or an idea to kind of think about in order to pursue whatever they're trying to pursue? Like, what advice would you give somebody?
I feel like there's advice for, you know, people like trying to get into it, but I feel like honestly what's just as important is really telling people who are already in it, like, please give something back. Like, especially if you're one of the designers that, you know, really had to punch your way through to get, like, you know, to where you are and stuff like that. Please, like, do not leave, like, you know, your contemporaries or, like, you know, the people coming up behind you. Don't leave them to go through the same thing that you had to go through. Like, my whole thing is, like, and I also say this because I'm the oldest of, like, you know, 3 brothers. So it's like, if I do something and, you know, it was difficult, why would I want something to be just as difficult for somebody who's coming behind me? So, like, clear the path for people to come through. So however that translates for you and your industry, make it that much easier. Reach out to some of this young talent. See how you can make yourself available to these young designers, you, like, you know, coming up. Because I honestly, the most important thing for, like, even me making my way into industry has been people who are like, no, like, I have been people who, like, you know, are walking forward, but turn around every now and then and just be like, oh, wait, I see this person here, this person there, that. And it's like, you know, there's this program for you. But it's like, you know, like, just making sure that these things are accessible. And it's like also for students, you know, wanting to get into that. And it's difficult because a lot of times, like, you know, students trying to get into, you know, professional design, you are faced with the whole, like, you know, the wall of art institutions. So it's like, and either like, based on money, either you can scale it or you can't. And it's like, I don't think that that's how that should work. So, and that's another thing as to, like, that's the end goal with my consultancy, like, you know, create this sort of separate validation system that's going to, like, you know, that allows for people's skills and talents to be validated outside of art institutions. and it's validated by not the institution, but by people who work in these fields and can definitively say whether these people, like, have these skills or not. And we don't want anything for it. Like, you don't have to pay me to say that you're good at something. I can freely admit that you're good at something. And it's like, that should mean something. And like, I feel like with enough designers, we can do that. So it's like, honestly, for people trying to get into design, I'd say, get it how you live. And like, sometimes you're not going to get the design job that you exactly want. Believe me, I haven't gotten all the jobs that I want. So I just say, honestly, keep your head up, keep designing, and just like continuously think of new ways to get into these things, and just like making your own lane and doing stuff like that. Think about what design is for you and what's unique about that, and then figure out how to market that, and just add value to yourself, and continuously improve on your skills to the best of your ability, to the point that you're just simply, you can't deny it. Like, where you're objectively talented, like, work towards that. And also, like, now people want, like, this whole like authenticity is somehow like, really this thing for companies, for people, and for design. Like, everybody wants authenticity all of a sudden. And everybody doesn't truly want it. They want, sound good, feel good authenticity. So it's like, honestly, keep that with you. Like, be the realist version of yourself. Like, don't necessarily sanitize everything. Of course, a little media training doesn't hurt, but don't just stay as true to yourself as possible, and just continue developing and building. And one piece of advice that I got really early on, I might have been like 15, was like, build it and they'll come. And I believe it's true. Like, you build something out and it's like, absolutely undeniable, it's subjective. People are going to be drawn to it. And another one, Jason also told me this. Damn, I just lost like my complete train of thought. But Jason was telling me once, like, his whole thing is like, you're not gonna whoop my ass, which is great. Like, it's great advice. Like, do what you're going to do and stand in it. Like, as a designer, like, you're not gonna whoop my ass. Like, and that's really like, that's as crazy as it sounds. It's not. It sounds like, almost confrontational, but it's like really sort of this affirmation of like, I know what I'm doing. It's like, I believe in it. And if you really know what you're doing,
we all got to own our own vision.
Right.
This is our life.
That's a big thing.
Yeah.
And that's I can offer that, just telling, just like, regurgitating what's been told to me. And it's like, just, passing information down. That's all I can do for people now.
1000%. That's kind of why I even started this, just sharing these stories that like can hopefully help influence other people and make their life a little bit easier with a little bit more context to people who have done it or are doing it. And this has been awesome, man. Like, truly, this is going to be one of the better episodes that I've been able to feature online. So I'm super stoked. Where can people find you? Do you have your own personal website, or do you want people to find you on Instagram? Or
I'm still working on like, having the website be exactly what I want it to be. Cause it's like, it's weird because like, I'm a designer, Matt, he's a photojournalist and journalism and design major. So it's like really still trying to find out like, what that balance is. So that's still coming. So look at bpb.design is going to be up and running in like the next maybe month or so. Okay. But other than that, you guys can reach out, find me on Instagram. That's probably one of the easier ways to catch me. Or you can do Behance or whatever you want. Just look around. I'm really not that hard to contact. So
I'll plug all of those below in the comments, so people can reach out to Nigel. Thank you for joining us on episode 31 of An Untold Narrative, man. This was awesome. I really can't say enough, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and being transparent with everybody. You are being your true self, and I appreciate that a lot.
Man, thank you so much for having me. It's always like, an honor and a pleasure to, have these conversations with people, especially like, in COVID and during the lockdown, because I can't have them with anybody in person. So I really appreciate you creating this platform and, just allowing people to have this sort of discourse and dialogue.
Absolutely, man. Well, I'm sure we'll talk super soon. It's nice to meet you, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again, man.
For sure, man. Thank you.
All right, cheers.